this class, it was only because people were in cultural anthropology as a major and they were forced into the class, as some of you were. As a major or as a minor, all of a sudden this popped into your life, and whether you liked it or not, you had to be here. And that was fine. But I like the new days as well, in which people from other majors or even from places like nursing and public health and other things, psychology, might be interested in finding out what anthropology has to do because of what you can do with it. And so my feeling is, I hope the way we keep things interesting is not because we're so interested in anthropology as itself, because you could get way into that, and I don't want to be there. I am that. But what I would most like to do in this class is talk to you about how anthropology can be useful, or as Guest put it, as a toolkit for a global age. So that said, we probably have to find out what anthropology is, and that's what the first part of this chapter is about. Now, Guest begins with this definition of anthropology: the study of the full scope of human diversity, past and present. I put this up here because in the old days, many people who studied anthropology would have stopped at the first part, the study of the full scope of human diversity, past and present, and then they would just end it there. But Guest goes on here to talk about the application of that knowledge to help people of different backgrounds better understand one another. Now, there might be some anthropologists in the world who are not as interested in that, and they only care about studying people. They don't care about helping people understand one another. But I think that this is an important part of what I would like to do in this class as a part of cultural anthropology. So whether you're an anthropology major, or whether you're in public health or nursing, or whether you are coming from a different society, or whether you're wanting to go to another society, that you can somehow try applying the knowledge to help people understand each other. Now, like I said, some of the old-fashioned anthropologists might have said that that's not as important as the study, but I, with Guest, would say it is a pretty important part. And so when we think about Guest's approach to this, he's not giving us, there is a branch of anthropology called applied anthropology, but he is certainly interested in how we can use anthropology in the world, or as a toolkit. Guest is interested in how anthropology is applied. Now, like I said, in the olden days, that people might not have cared that much about that, but it has a long history in the discipline. Many anthropologists put this on their syllabus. It's a quote from Ruth Benedict, who is one of the first people in anthropology. She's writing this from maybe the 1930s, so about 100 years ago, at a time when anthropology is only starting to emerge as an academic discipline. She is a student of Franz Boas, who we'll talk about. But the reason I'm putting up this black and white picture of a person who is long departed and was writing this in the 1930s is just to impress to you that for many anthropologists, it was never just the study of people. So here's Benedict saying that the purpose of anthropology is to make the world safe for human differences. We might wonder how well we have done in the last 100 years at that. Are we safer in terms of human differences? The 1930s was a time when people were not being very nice to each other in terms of human differences. And so maybe we're doing better than that, but we probably could say that we have a decent amount of work to do if we really want to make the world safe for human differences. And so again, I just put that out there to let you know that the approach in which we try to help people understand each other has a long history within anthropology. Guest outlines here several ways in which anthropology has a unique approach. Interestingly, the first example he talks about is from the Naki Rama. What are these people like? What do they think about the body? They do have a very cult-like attitude towards things. Who are these guys? I pondered assigning you this article again, but I figured so many of you had done it there that it wasn't something I would do over again. But yeah, I once put this little animation in there. The Naki Rama are us. It was an article written by the anthropologist Horace Miner in the 1950s. It's debatable exactly what his purpose was. He may have been actually critiquing anthropology itself for describing other people in these weird ways. But it's come to be used as this example of how if we redescribe things like brushing our teeth or shaving in anthropological terms, it sounds like we're in some kind of a cult. Often, or some students remind me that if you did this today and you looked at people who go to, say, the tanning salon, Horace Miner would have a lot of material to work on about the weirdness of the Naki Rama today. We somehow, I don't know, are we making America safe for human differences, or are we trying to become more and more alike? So the point of this, though, has to do with something that we get from anthropology sometimes, which is taking a familiar practice like brushing our teeth or shaving or going to the tanning salon, something that seems so normal and, well, what do we do with it? Okay, so one thing we can explain why it is that something that looks strange, by breaking it down, we can say why it is that something that looks strange is actually logical. And we can take what is familiar or seems so natural to us and describe it in these terms that then makes it seem strange. Like, why do I feel the need to scrape my face with a razor in the morning? Who made me do that? And so this is a common tactic in anthropology, which we'll see throughout the semester, is maybe taking something that looks so normal and then twisting it around, or of course, taking things from faraway peoples that seem strange and showing us the logic to them. So in some ways, all societies have to be a little bit ethnocentric, right? Just to survive, you can't be questioning your activities every step of the way. But what you want to avoid is the idea that your way of life is the only valid way of life, and that other people's way of life is necessarily or is inferior, not natural, or excuse me, not human. And so again, this is not to say that you can't appreciate your own way of life, but you have to understand other people's way of life in its own context. We'll talk more about this. This is not necessarily to say that we approve of everything that's around us, but we don't want to automatically assume that our way of life is superior. A little later on, Guest talks about another part of anthropology's unique approach, which is the belief that all humans are connected. So a couple of you talked about this in terms of anthropology's global perspective and diverse perspective, but it's also important to understand that people have been connected to each other for a very long time. And for me, there's a longer quote from your text, but it's hugely important as we look at different societies and as we look at our world today, that as Guest says, human history is a story of movement and interaction. For those of you who are into biological anthropology, becoming human involved becoming mobile, becoming bipedal, being able to walk around. And from the earliest part of our species, we have been moving and interacting with each other. interaction and connection are not new phenomena. They have been central to human history. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next class and throughout about, those forms of interconnection which are perhaps newer to us and how people are able to travel and get to different places, perhaps faster than they did in the past. But I want to start out by emphasizing that even those people who might seem far away have always been interconnected in terms of that's how humans are, and it's very basic to human life. Guest then goes on to describe the 4 fields of U.S. anthropology. He calls it U.S. anthropology. In a previous textbook, an author from Canada said that they do Canadian anthropology the same way, so I've taken it to calling it the 4 fields of North American anthropology because we don't want to leave out the Canadians. Phil, you took biological anthropology. So a lot of human evolution, a lot of exploration of the diversity of human beings. If you haven't taken biological anthropology, sign up for it this spring. What's one of the most important lessons from biological anthropology, I think?
Concept of race?
The concept of race. Yeah.
Not biological.
Oh yeah. We'll talk about this in this class as well, but the idea that people can be biologically sorted into like 3 different groups and that those groups would have huge biological meaning is not supported by biological anthropology. But that was just a little taste of what we'll talk about later. You were just in field school? What was it like?
A lot of digging.
A lot of digging. There's linguistic anthropology. It's the smallest of the 4 subfields. We'll talk some about language, which is more what linguistic anthropology talks about. But it's one of the more difficult subfields because talking about language demands a specialized language of its own, but pretty fascinating too. I feel like we're missing a field. Oh yeah, what we're studying. Yeah, so Guest goes through those 3 fields, and those are all fine. But what we're doing here is cultural anthropology, and what cultural anthropology generally studies are contemporary people today or in the more recent past, let's say the last 100 years. And cultural anthropology of the 4 fields, at least in the United States, is actually the largest of the 4 fields in terms of the number of people who are anthropologists. To do cultural anthropology, or to do the primary method of studying other people in cultural anthropology, is something we call participant observation. We'll talk a lot more about this in a whole chapter, or ethnographic fieldwork, where you go to another society and basically immerse yourself as much as possible. You are obviously an observer. You're not trying to be a spy or blend in so much that nobody knows what you're doing. You're still an observer. You're still making sure you've informed people that you are studying them. You are often doing interviews and questionnaires and surveys and those kinds of things, but you're also trying to live as much as possible like the people you are studying with. Yeah, disciplines like sociology and psychology, economics, they tend to do more survey research or get things from interviews, and anthropologists use interviews and surveys and those kinds of things. But what we usually don't do, for example, is do a research experiment on people. We're trying to actually be with them in their lives. And so it has less hypothesis testing, you might say, because you're just trying to go there and figure out what's going on from the people themselves. And so there is an aspect to anthropology which is simply very immersive, unlike other disciplines. And Guest mentions here, and you talked about it in your quote, is that has often meant going to places of people who have been excluded from the main forms of power. So places which might be considered non-Western or non-elite, or places where other disciplines simply haven't cared to study, have been ignored. So on the one hand, anthropology has a reputation for going to places where nobody else would go. On the other hand, you said that people are studying other people as well. What kind of people are anthropologists studying in addition to those people way out there in jungles and stuff?
Like contemporary elites.
Yeah.
Just the structure and the rise of authorities legitimized.
In the foundations of anthropology, they pretty much went to places that were far off, the places that had never been studied. But in the 1960s, there were anthropologists who called for what they called studying up and to study the power structures of society, so the people on top as well. So there have been anthropologists who have studied, say, designers of nuclear weapons and done, to the extent they could, participant observation with the people who worked in nuclear weaponry. Now, this brings up all sorts of ethical issues, which are different. There are ethical issues of going off and studying with the Inuit, but there are also ethical issues of studying people who are designing nuclear weapons. You're not trying to be ethnocentric, but at the same time, it might be not in line with your values. So again, what it has to do with, though, is that anthropology takes these methods of going there and being with people and using that to open up, hopefully, a whole world of information which may not have been available if you were simply looking at people from afar or surveying them from a distance.